Hello, I'm Vanessa Maria Graber, and this is Free Press Live, brought to you by Free Press, a nonprofit, nonpartisan media reform advocacy organization. Free Press Live is your weekly source for updates and live discussion of what's happening in the world of communication and technology rights. You can learn more about our work at freepress.net. On today's show, I am going to be talking to Free Press Policy Manager Dana Floberg and Campaign Manager Heather Franklin, who will be joining us to discuss their work advocating for the passage of the Accessible, Affordable Internet for All Act and other measures in the infrastructure legislation to make high-speed internet affordable. We'll talk about all of that and more on this episode of Free Press Live. But right now, stay tuned for our intro, and we'll be back with the headlines. Welcome back. I'm your host, Vanessa Maria Graber, and here are a few news stories about media and technology this week. Last week, New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy signed the state's $46.4 billion budget, which includes a $1 million investment in the Civic Information Consortium, a groundbreaking program that supports local news and information initiative and fosters more informed communities. The consortium is a result of Free Press Action's years-long efforts to engage local journalists, organizers, universities, advocates, residents, and lawmakers to support public funding for journalism and civic information. Last month, the consortium announced its inaugural round of grantees, which were supported with $500,000 for fiscal year 2021 funding. The fiscal year 2022 budget that Governor Murphy signed last week doubles the state's commitment to this effort, another sign that New Jersey's leadership recognizes the need to foster more informed and engaged communities amid a local news and misinformation crisis. Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Nikole Hannah-Jones has announced that she will join the faculty at Howard University, one of the country's most prestigious historically Black universities, instead of joining the faculty at her alma mater, the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, where she went to graduate school. The decision by Hannah-Jones comes after her tenure was initially denied by the UNC Board of Trustees in May, when it was unanimously approved by the faculty. She was later awarded tenure after months of student-led protests, community organizing, and nationwide calls for her to be awarded tenure. She said, "I cannot imagine working at and advancing a school named for a man who lobbied against me, who used his wealth to influence the hires and ideology of the journalism school, who ignored my 20 years of journalism experience, all my credentials, all of my work, because he believed that a project that centered Black Americans equaled the denigration of white Americans. Nor can I work at an institution whose leadership permitted this conduct and has nothing to do to disavow it." Hannah-Jones is referring to her work on the 1619 Project while she was at the New York Times. Jones will be creating a new initiative, the Center for Journalism and Democracy at Howard University, which will be aimed at training aspiring journalists to cover the crisis of our democracy and bolstering journalism programs at historically Black colleges and universities across the country. Congressional leaders and Free Press are urging the Federal Communications Commission to examine how policy decisions and programs have disparately harmed Black Americans and other communities of color, according to a letter sent to acting FCC Chair Jessica Rosenworcel. The effort, led by Democratic Representatives Jamal Bowman of New York, Yvette Clarke of New York, and Brenda Lawrence of Michigan, along with Free Press's Media 2070 initiative, said that the FCC should conduct an assessment to address and redress the harm the agency's policies and programs have caused Black and Brown communities, and identify the affirmative steps the agency commits to taking to break down barriers to just media and telecommunication practices. In total, 25 members of Congress signed on to the letter, which calls on the FCC to address its role in creating and perpetuating structural racism. If you'd like more information about any of those stories, you can follow us on our social media at Free Press. Today's show is about access to affordable internet for all, and I will be joined by two Free Press staffers who have been working very hard to pass legislation that will do just that. The digital divide separates the 69 million people in the United States who lack home internet access for everyone else. The internet isn't a luxury, it's a necessity, like access to running water or electricity. People without internet access are figuratively and literally disconnected from an increasingly digital world. Millions of low-income families in the United States are unable to tap into the resources of high-speed internet access provides because the cost is too high. The economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated the digital divide and exposed the vast inequalities that exist when it comes to internet access. On today's Free Press Live, we'll talk with Free Press Policy Manager Dana Floberg and Campaign Manager Heather Franklin about their work advocating for the passage of the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act and other measures in the infrastructure legislation to make high-speed internet affordable. This package of infrastructure bills would provide vital, long-term support for the 34% of low-income home broadband users who have struggled to pay their internet bills during the pandemic, and for the millions of disconnected people who haven't been able to afford to subscribe at all. We'll talk more about how broadband is an essential pathway out of poverty and why access to affordable internet is a racial justice issue. Now I'd like to bring on my guests, Dana Floberg and Heather Franklin. Welcome to Free Press Live. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Vanessa.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, so you both have been busy at work trying to advocate, organize, and educate people about the digital divide and the many problems associated with the high costs of internet. And you have been working hard in Washington to work with Congress to pass a series of bills with the infrastructure package. Can you tell us a little bit more about what these bills would do to help increase access to the internet and make it more affordable for families in the United States?
Yeah, so right now Congress is working to pass an infrastructure package to support all different kinds of infrastructure across the United States, including broadband. There's a couple of different bills that Free Press has supported and would really love to see included in this package. The number one bill that we've been talking about a lot that Vanessa mentioned is the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act. This bill would do a lot of things, would set aside a lot of money to build out internet services in areas that currently don't have it, as well as areas that are underserved, where they have some broadband availability, but not really enough. It also does a tremendous amount to support affordable internet, which has been a huge priority for Free Press since, we need the wires in the ground, we need the towers built, but we also need to make sure that everybody can afford to connect to the internet when it's built out. Otherwise, the very fact of that infrastructure being there doesn't do us as much good unless we can make sure that it's universally and equitably affordable. So that's one of the things we've been looking for the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act. There's also other bills that we've been pushing in terms of the Green Communications Act, which promotes resilient infrastructure, the Maintaining Emergency Services Act, which helps to put a stop to internet service shutoffs as well as other utility service shutoffs, and the Broadband Justice Act, which would reclassify internet service as a utility service so that it could be subsidized for those living in federally assisted housing. So those are kind of our top priorities for what we would love to see in this infrastructure package.
Thank you for that overview. A lot of people don't realize that a series of bills are passed at one time. And so when you hear journalists talking about the infrastructure package, it's many, many different bills. And so we're talking specifically about the ones that are targeting broadband internet access. I wanted to ask, again, we're still in the middle of a pandemic. Millions of people are still out of work, and people are still working from home, and students are still in virtual schools. Obviously, internet access has been critical during this time. Why is it so important now that Congress take action?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always important, and it's really important for us to note that the digital divide has been an issue for a very long time, long predating the pandemic. We've seen the data that says particularly low-income communities and communities of color have been connected to the internet at far lower rates than their wealthier or whiter counterparts, which to us says there's a problem here with affordability and there's a problem here with systemic racism. And so both of these are issues that have long needed more policy attention to address. The pandemic hugely exacerbated this. We know that the internet is essential for so many things today, but it becomes even more essential when it needs to replace almost every social activity in order to keep people safe. You know, when people started ordering groceries online so that there would be fewer people in grocery stores. We heard stories of people who had to attend Zoom hearings to see whether or not they would get evicted from their homes. You didn't have internet, you can't show up to that hearing, you can't defend your right to maintain your housing. You can't connect to schools, you can't connect to work, you can't connect to doctors. So really what we've seen is that all of the problems that have always existed for people who are disconnected in this country, who again are predominantly marginalized in a variety of other ways, all of those problems just became tenfold as suddenly all of the normal things that people would do, even the ways that disconnected people would try to access the internet without having it at home, right? Going to libraries, going to public spaces became much, much more dangerous. That was a real problem that I think, and it's still ongoing. It's still an ongoing problem as people are trying to keep themselves safe and as they're dealing with the economic fallout of having lost jobs, of seeing internet bills that they increasingly still cannot afford and still need to connect in all these same ways. It's really important that we address these issues immediately.
Yeah, and many court proceedings are still done now through Zoom or the internet, and even visits with people who are incarcerated are done through video conferencing services. The list goes on of critical services like applying for Medicaid, applying for food stamps, oftentimes happens in online through websites. Heather, I wanted to give you a chance to chime here to talk in more about our work overall in trying to make internet more affordable and accessible for people here in the United States.
Yeah, so I times 100 everything that Dana just said. And the piece that I would like really double down on is that all of those stories, we saw them make national headlines over the last year. People were really, really keyed in and paid attention to the impacts that people were experiencing because they didn't have access to high-speed internet at home. And so it's really urgent that Congress act now because frankly, like there's a lot of political will to get it done. And it's always been urgent, but it's really important, particularly when you're talking about Congress, to take action in the moment while people are paying attention, while it's something they care about, to make sure that we are getting these things for folks who so desperately need them.
Yeah, that's an important point to make. There are many communities in the US that have no broadband service at all. I know that is shocking to people, but that is true, especially in rural areas, indigenous communities, even parts of Puerto Rico where my family is. There are either no broadband providers or there's only one, there's no competition. Tell us more about how this a set of bills would help improve broadband infrastructure.
So I'm also from a community that doesn't have universal access. I'm from a small rural town in Vermont. And so I know what it's like to live somewhere that's on and underconnected. And the infrastructure package is going to include a lot of funding to build out those wires that Dana was talking about earlier. And, so much of the conversation here in DC is about increasing access by building infrastructures in communities like the one that I grew up in. But what so much of those conversations ignore is affordability. Sometimes they'll talk about building out wires to the exclusion of talking about affordability, when, as Dana said a few minutes ago, it doesn't matter if the wire runs to your house if you can't afford the connection. And one of the things that frustrates me a lot listening to congressional hearings is, like, members often paint them as an either or. Like, we can either make sure that the wires are running everywhere, or we can make sure people can afford access, but we can't do both. And at Free Press, we're really focused on making sure that people can truly access high-speed internet by reminding those policymakers that affordability matters at every turn. We are always there saying, like, yes, we need the wires, we need the physical infrastructure, and we got to make sure people can afford it.
And we need competition, right? Because if there's only one internet service provider and their prices are really high, then you're still not able to access it, right? So we need more infrastructure, more providers, more local, right? Local businesses. I've actually been to towns where they have local businesses providing internet. It's not something you see in a lot of big cities. So it's not only a rural issue, but in urban areas as well. I want to move on to the emergency broadband benefit. We did a show a few weeks back about this, which is really exciting. We're encouraging people to take advantage. Can you tell us how this is a little bit different from that, or might support that program?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're really excited about that also was initially in the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act is additional funding to support the emergency broadband benefit. Initially, the emergency benefit got about $3.2 billion, I want to say, in initial funding to allow low-income families to get up to $50 a month, $75 a month if you live in tribal areas, to support and to subsidize internet service. That's awesome. This new bill, the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act, has also includes an additional $6 billion to further fund that program, to make sure that it's really there, that a lot of people can take advantage of it and can take advantage of it for a longer period of time. We think that $6 billion should be the floor, right? That's what we should start with. We really need to be committed to this program, to understanding that affordability is a huge issue right now during this pandemic, as we see people dealing with the economic fallout of this pandemic, and it will continue to be an issue going forward, right? Affordability is a long-term problem. We need a lot of different solutions too, right? Free Press also is pushing to make different changes at the Federal Communications Commission so we can have some authority to investigate different business practices, make sure that the prices that are being set by these companies are just and reasonable. But we also just need money. We need money to make sure that this is an essential service that everyone can afford, even if they are struggling, even if they're unemployed. All of these things should not be exclusionary barriers to getting internet access. So that's one of the things we're very excited about. We've also been pushing for Congress to take this opportunity to not just add additional funding to the emergency broadband benefit, but to improve it by saying, right now the program is opt-in. An internet service provider could say, we would like to participate in this program and accept this benefit, or they can choose not to. We'd like to switch it from being an opt-in to an all-in, where if you're an internet service provider, you have to accept this benefit the same way you would accept any customer's money of any sort. And that you have to accept it for all available tiers. That's really important for us too, because low-income communities should have just as much choice in terms of what kind of service they want, what speeds they want, as anybody else, right? They shouldn't be forced into either really limited packages if they know they need more speed, they want faster speeds, nor should they be upsold into tiers that they don't want to get if that feels like it's too expensive for them, even with the benefit. We really want to give people the maximum amount of choice, and we think that this is also an opportunity for Congress to not just get us at least an additional $6 billion into that program, but to improve it by saying, let's improve choice. Let's maximize the amount of choice people can have when they use this program.
Right. If there's about 70 million people out there who lack affordable internet access or access at all, the amount that's currently set aside is not a lot, right? And so, again, when we know some internet service providers can charge anywhere from $50 to $100 a month. So do the math there, right? That money is going to go really fast, and it'd be good to have additional resources so that more people could take advantage of that program. We're going to drop a link to the EBB program information in our comments, so check back later. And there's also a link to our past show on that. We learn more about how to take advantage of the EBB. Right now, if you have been watching the news or the Weather Channel, you will see that it is highly unusual for a tropical storm to be hitting the state of Florida during the month of July. Again, this speaks to the growing climate crisis and more storms like this becoming larger, more frequent, and hitting the U.S. mainland and islands in the Caribbean. Can you talk about how this legislation would improve infrastructure to be able to withstand these storms, like I said, that are becoming more powerful, more frequent, coming earlier in hurricane season? And as I watched the news today, they warned people the power is going to be out, water is going to be limited. So again, people are going to be cut off from internet and phone service probably, depending on how the storm is affecting their area. And we saw this was a major issue in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria in the island of Puerto Rico, where communication infrastructure was down for months and still really limited in some places.
Yeah, this is a huge part of the reason why Free Press is supportive of the Green Communications Act. That's that part of the package that would really focus on building up infrastructure resiliency to make sure that it is energy efficient, and also to make sure that our infrastructure is better able to withstand these kinds of disasters and crises. This has been something we've had a lot of folks here at Free Press who've been working since Hurricane Maria, Hurricane Irma, to try and figure out what specifically went wrong here. We shouldn't see communities that lack phone service, lack internet service for as long as they did, especially when in a disaster. So often, your cell phone is the way you find out about where you can get help, right? Where there's clean water, where there's shelter, where there's aid being delivered. It's a really, really critical service. So the Green Communications Act specifically sets aside funding for resilient infrastructure that can withstand these kinds of disasters, and also urges the Federal Communications Commission to set up a framework by which they can start to figure out what needs to be done in these kinds of situations, what kinds of structures and policy frameworks need to exist, so that we can make sure that this kind of communications blackout doesn't happen when these kinds of disasters happen. We know that they happen a lot. We also know that they are particularly likely to happen in communities that are overlooked, communities of color, communities like Puerto Rico.
Yeah, one of the things people don't realize is the failure of the 911 system, right? Like during or after the hurricane, it didn't allow people to call for help. And that is how a lot of people died. They were not able to get medical treatment. They weren't able to communicate with local officials. And then a lot of radio stations weren't able to broadcast emergency messages, right? We have the emergency alert system. A lot of people don't know that EAS equipment goes through the internet. Those messages that come from, statewide emergency communications broadcasters goes through internet, Wi-Fi signal. And so again, if that infrastructure is not working, radio stations can't deliver those messages. So this is life-saving stuff here that we're talking about, right? This is really critical. Again, if you're just tuning in, you're watching Free Press Live. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. I'm joined by my colleagues, Dana Floberg and Heather Franklin, and we've been talking about the Accessible Affordable Internet for All Act and their work at Free Press, organizing to make internet more accessible for everyone. We just have a few minutes left, and I just want to ask about one last thing, which is connected to work that you have been doing in the No Shutoffs Coalition. But one of the big problems that we are seeing is, with evictions, with shutoffs, and people not being able to access low-income programs because of past debts with utilities. Can you tell us a little bit, again, how this legislation would address that and make it easier for people to be able to restore their internet access?
Yeah, so for much of this pandemic, Free Press has been working with the No Shutoffs Coalition, also known as the Utility Justice Coalition, and trying to figure out how we address these kinds of shutoffs. We've been really excited to see a bill out now, the Maintaining Emergency Services Act, that would effectively, for internet providers and as well as for other utility providers who choose to participate, would allow them to just wipe out customer debt with the condition that they, for the period of this emergency, for a specific predetermined period of time, that they would stop shutting off people's services if they couldn't afford to pay their bills. This is really critical because absolutely, in this time, we know a lot of people can't afford those bills. And they also can't afford to be accruing debt in this time either. They need those essential services to stay on so they can, in the case of water and power, wash their hands and have electricity. And for internet to connect to all of the things that we know internet is essential to connect to. People need to be able to maintain those services, even if they're struggling to afford their bills. And they also shouldn't be punished later with a mountain of debt that they will be unable to get back. So we're really hoping to see this bill also included in the infrastructure package.
Thank you for that overview. Heather, how can people take action if they're watching this and they say, hey, I support this legislation? What can I do to help? Where should they go?
Well, thank you for asking, Vanessa Maria. As it so happens, we have a petition that folks can sign. We're going to be delivering them automatically to folks, members of Congress, to let those offices know right away that their constituents care about these issues. And you can support our work in all of the ways that everyone always does. And it's also good to pick up the phone. If you sign that petition, pick up the phone, call the Capitol switchboard. Give your lawmakers a ring and let them know that you want them to support these measures in the infrastructure package, because it is moving hopefully quickly. And we'll see. Congress moves on its own timeline. And we're hoping to make sure that we get the best outcome as possible.
Yes, and we also would love to hear from you. So drop a comment or write to us, follow us at Free Press, and let us know what internet is like in your community. Again, we're always collecting stories of people from all over the country who are trying to access this important resource. And again, we take these stories to members of Congress and the FCC to advocate on your behalf. Heather Franklin, Dana Floberg, thank you so much for your work on this issue and for sharing more information about this important legislation.
Yeah, thank you so much for having us on.
Okay, that's going to do it for this edition of Free Press Live. Thank you for tuning in today, your source for news and updates from the world of communications rights. Free Press Live airs every Wednesday at 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time, live on Facebook and YouTube, but you can catch all of our past episodes on our Facebook page and our YouTube channel, Free Press. You can learn more about our work and how to take action at freepress.net. Free Press doesn't accept any funding from government or corporations. You can help keep our work going by donating now at freepress.net/donate. And again, if you want to continue getting updates and information, make sure you hit that like button or subscribe on YouTube. I'm Vanessa Maria Graber. Thank you so much for listening and watching. We'll see you next time.